A piece of hot, crispy fried chicken, a shiny new car sitting on the showroom floor, a full year of hard work, or just one quiet hour beside the person you love. Everything, whether tangible or intangible, once it enters social life, can be reduced to a single denominator, an invisible unit that shapes nearly every human decision. We call that unit money. Everyone uses it, yet very few truly understand it. What exactly is money? Why does it have value? Who creates it? And how can a few digits on a banking screen alter the entire course of a person's life? Let's explore and unravel the nature of money, the most abstract form of power humanity has ever invented. To understand the nature of modern money, we first have to turn back the clock and ask, why did humans need money in the first place? Thousands of years ago, people woke up each day to create only what was essential: food, clothing, basic tools. As societies grew, needs multiplied, but no one could produce everything by themselves. So humanity came up with an idea. I make what I'm good at, you make what you're good at, and we trade. It sounds simple enough. Person A has 10 sacks of wheat. Person B raises chickens. They agree to trade 10 sacks for one chicken. The exchange works perfectly, but only if each person happens to have exactly what the other wants. But picture this. One day, wanting to improve his life, Person A goes to Person C to trade wheat for dried fish. Yet Person C has no interest in taking in more wheat, and that's when trouble begins. As the demand for exchange grew, goods themselves quickly exposed their limitations. People lacked a common yardstick to know how many sacks of rice equaled one chicken, or how many dried fish equaled one iron axe. They had no way to divide value into smaller units, no reliable means of storing it, and, most importantly, no object they could carry over long distances without hassle or risk of spoilage. And from those small inconveniences, the world began searching for something more. A special kind of object that could measure the value of everything else, store that value, be carried over long distances, and, above all, be accepted by everyone. So humans started looking for a medium, something people would willingly accept no matter their trade. In some regions, they used salt because it was precious and essential for survival. Elsewhere, they used shells, valued for their rarity and resistance to counterfeiting. And as societies advanced, attention shifted to precious metals: durable, beautiful, easy to transport, gold and silver. But the real turning point came around 600 BCE, when the Kingdom of Lydia, in what is now Turkey, minted the first metal coins in human history. For the first time, value no longer lived inside sacks of grain or herds of animals. It was condensed into a small, portable object, and most importantly, an object everyone collectively agreed had worth. From that moment on, gold and silver were no longer just precious metals for storage or decoration. They became the shared language of trade, the standard unit of value the world relied on for more than 2,000 years. While gold and silver were becoming the standard across many civilizations, the East, particularly China, chose a completely different path. From the 7th to the 10th century, they invented something so new that the rest of the world had never imagined it: paper money. Early notes like jiaozi or huizi were essentially pieces of paper that recorded value, created to replace the heavy strings of bronze coins merchants had to carry on long journeys. What made these notes extraordinary was that they weren't backed by gold or silver. Their value came from the reputation of the issuer and from the community's belief in the paper itself. If the person receiving it trusted that others would also accept it, the note had value. But the moment that trust disappeared, the paper became meaningless. In essence, this was the earliest version of what we now call fiat money, the modern form of currency we use today, still built on trust, but managed through an entire framework of central banks and legal systems. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, private money shops began issuing their own notes and drafts to make long-distance trade easier. A merchant could carry a single slip of paper and receive silver in another city, without hauling heavy metal across the country. But all of these papers rested on the same foundation: trust. There was no vault of gold, no physical assets backing them, only promises and the confidence between the issuer and the user. But while the East was exploring paper money built on trust, the other side of the continent was moving in a very different direction. Europe was gradually shaping a system tightly bound to precious metals, especially gold. And from this place, a concept would soon emerge that would transform the entire history of global finance. In 17th century Europe, a particular group of people played an unexpectedly crucial role: the goldsmiths. They weren't just skilled at crafting jewelry. More importantly, they owned exceptionally secure vaults. Merchants, who often traveled with large amounts of gold, soon realized that depositing their gold with the goldsmiths was far safer than carrying it themselves. Each time someone deposited gold, the goldsmith wrote a note. "The bearer of this paper owns X amount of gold stored in my vault." That small slip became a gold deposit receipt. At first, people only used it to withdraw their own gold. But then something interesting happened. The receipts were far too convenient. Merchants realized that instead of taking the gold out and handing it to someone else, they could simply transfer the receipt. Whoever held the paper could bring it to the goldsmith and claim the exact amount of gold it represented. The gold stayed safely in the vault, while the paper moved freely through society. These gold deposit receipts began to be accepted as a form of money. By the late 17th century, this evolution reached a turning point. In 1694, the Bank of England was founded and started issuing national banknotes that could be redeemed for gold. From that moment, paper money was no longer just a private promise between individuals. It became an official part of the financial system. The state itself now guaranteed this note can be exchanged for real gold. This was the birth of gold-backed money, currency that held value because actual gold sat behind it. And from this seed, the gold standard, the most powerful monetary system in history, began to take shape. From the 18th century to the early 20th century, the gold standard operated almost like a flawless machine. Every national currency was tied to a fixed amount of gold. Every international transaction could be measured and settled in gold. Gold became the axis of global trade. The anchor that convinced people value always had a place to return to. Trust in gold was so strong that as long as the vault still held it, many believed the system could never collapse. But history would prove the opposite. As the 20th century dawned, Europe still looked powerful on the surface, but underneath lay decades of political tension and national ambition. And then, in 1914, the world plunged into one of its bloodiest chapters, the First World War. Within days of the first shots being fired, the gold standard faced a shock it could not withstand. From London to Berlin, citizens rushed to the banks, desperate to withdraw their money and convert it into gold. People feared that war would destroy the value of paper money, bankrupt the banks, or leave them waking up one morning to find that the notes they held had become worthless. And soon, governments themselves needed gold, a massive amount of it, to buy weapons, ammunition, food, steel, fuel, everything required for war. But the gold standard imposed an iron rule. You could only print money if you had gold to back it. No gold meant no new money. War demanded unlimited funds. Gold was limited. The two could not coexist. At this point, nations faced a life or death choice: keep the gold and preserve the principle, or print money to survive and continue the war. Within weeks, Britain, Germany, France, and Russia, the four largest financial powers in Europe, simultaneously suspended gold convertibility. Banks refused all requests to exchange notes for gold. The banknotes once considered redeemable at any moment were now, by government decree, no longer exchangeable. That was the moment the classical gold standard, a system that had operated smoothly for nearly a century, collapsed entirely. It didn't die slowly. It died in panic, in gunfire, and in the decisions of nations that to win the war, they had to abandon gold. The gold remained in the vaults, but its role, the foundation of money, was finished. In the years that followed, the world tried to revive the gold standard and failed again and again. The Bank of England attempted a return in 1925 at the old exchange rate, only to fall in 1931. The United States tried to keep its gold promise to the public, then was forced to outlaw gold redemption in 1930. Across the globe, a single reality was becoming impossible to ignore. Gold was no longer sufficient to serve as the foundation of money in a modern world. After the chaos of war in 1944, as the guns of the Second World War fell silent, the major nations realized the world could no longer live with the monetary disorder of the previous decades. Gold was no longer sufficient to back every currency. The classical gold standard had died on the battlefield in 1914, and every attempt to revive it had ended in failure. The world needed a new system, something stronger than gold, more flexible than gold. yet still capable of carrying the trust that gold once provided. So representatives from 44 nations gathered in a small mountain town in the United States, Bretton Woods. They did not come to negotiate peace. They came to negotiate money. Inside that old wooden conference hall, a bold idea was proposed, one that would shape the next century. If gold is not enough for everyone, then let the world anchor itself to a single currency. And that currency will be anchored to gold. The currency chosen, not the British pound, not the French franc, was the United States dollar. Why the United States? Because after the war, America was almost the only major nation left standing. Its factories were untouched, its industrial power was at its peak, and most importantly, the United States held nearly 2/3 of all the world's gold reserves. No other country had enough gold to back its own currency. Only the United States could do it. And so a new system was born. 1 ounce of gold was fixed at $35. Other nations pegged their currencies to the US dollar. And only governments, not ordinary citizens, were allowed to exchange dollars for gold. The US dollar became the sole descendant of the gold standard. Gold became the reserve standing behind the dollar. It was a historic agreement, and it turned the dollar into the center of the global economy for the next 3 decades. During the Bretton Woods era, the world operated with an almost uncanny stability. Currencies were controlled, inflation remained low, international trade surged, and nations rebuilt at remarkable speed. But that calm did not last forever. Somewhere beneath the surface, an invisible force was growing. A force that even gold could no longer restrain. The United States government's massive spending. The Korean War, the Vietnam War, the arms race. Hundreds of billions of dollars were printed to sustain America's role as a superpower. The world began to notice an uncomfortable truth. The United States was printing far more dollars than the gold it actually possessed. The sharpest nations, especially France under Charles de Gaulle, no longer accepted the story that $35 equals 1 ounce of gold. They started collecting dollars and bringing them directly to America's vaults to exchange for real gold. Gold began flowing out of the United States at an alarming pace. National reserves plunged toward danger. If conversions continued, America would eventually run out of gold entirely. And then, on the evening of August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon appeared on television and delivered a statement that changed the entire history of global money. The United States will temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. Temporarily, but in reality, forever. With a single announcement, America ended the promise it had made in 1944. The golden door closed, and it would never open again. In that moment, the world entered a completely new era, the era of fiat money, a system where currency is no longer backed by any precious metal, but created out of debt. And to understand how modern money truly works, money born from debt, money created by the banking system with nothing more than a keystroke, we must turn to an entirely different chapter of the story, a chapter almost no one has ever been taught properly.